Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Personnel Committee meeting. Any apology?
No apologies, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair,
Late?
Councillor said he'll be rather late. He's en route, but I think he's stuck in traffic.
Okay, thank you. Late item to be introduced by the chair, none. Declaration of interest? No. Minutes of the meeting held on 24th of June, 21. Are we all agree with them? No, thank you. Any matter rising? Page 1, page 2, page 3, no. Page 4, page 5, page 6, no, thank you. Item number 5, attendance management, quarter 1. Liz?
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to just bring the committee's attention to a standing report that we always bring to Personnel Committee in terms of our performance on our attendance management. And this is the performance for quarter 1 this financial year. So if I can draw out a couple of points, Chair, from the recommendations, that I'm asking the committee to note that the Council's performance on attendance for quarter 1 was 2.41 days lost for each full-time equivalent colleague against a target of 2.12 days. This actually shows an improvement against the previous quarter, quarter 4, where the result was 2.54 days. And also, as we've done in recent reports, Chair, just to draw to the committee's attention and ask you to note that if we actually took out the COVID-related absence, sickness absence, either suspected or confirmed, the quarter 1 performance would actually be 2.19 days lost. So if I can just draw your attention to some of the supporting information, we've continued to see the top 3 reasons for absence in this quarter be stress and anxiety, musculoskeletal and COVID-related absence. Although we have seen the priority order, if I can put it that way, Chair, of those absences move this quarter, and we have seen a decrease in quarter 1 of the number of COVID-related absence cases, which is obviously pleasing to hear and good to hear for the well-being of our colleagues. I would also like to remind the committee, continuing in section 4.1, that managers, as I hope you can see from the recent reports that we've been bringing to Personnel Committee, are continuing to take a very focused approach on attendance management, supported by HR colleagues and others, and individual heads of service own service action plans that are specific to their own service areas, and they have appropriate access to detailed information about the absence and attendance in their services, and they use this detailed information to base their action plans. I know in previous committee meetings we've also highlighted the well-being approach and the continued focus on well-being that the Council is bringing to its workforce. We've always put a high priority on that, and I think particularly we can see that during the continuing pandemic. So we have reviewed our mental health first aid activity that we've had in the Council for a couple of years. We've actually repositioned our mental health first aiders as mental health champions, and this is around taking a more proactive support role for managers and colleagues, rather than perhaps people might not have interacted with the first aiders in that sort of first aid crisis situation. So this is about the champions continuing to raise the importance of well-being and help enable, where it's needed, conversations to happen on an ongoing basis about checking in on individual colleagues' well-being and team well-being. And we also, as part of our review, identified that it would be helpful to have some more male mental health champions, and also some of the areas of the Council where perhaps the number of mental health champions that we had, it would be helpful to increase that number so that there was always a regular base on which to draw. And we've run a very successful campaign earlier this year to recruit more mental health champions, and you can see from section 4.2 of the report that we've recruited an additional 60 volunteers, 30 of whom were men, and we also have more colleagues waiting on our waiting list to be trained to become mental health champions, which I hope the committee will agree is a really positive step. So in total now, we've trained over 200 mental health champions, and as I say, there's enough people now on our waiting list to exceed our target of 250 mental health champions by the end of the financial year. So again, I hope this helps give the committee some assurance on the continued approach that we're taking in terms of focusing on colleague wellbeing. So, Chair, in terms of the recommendations at section 2.1 and 2.2, it's really asking the committee to note the performance in Q1 against our target, and also noting the figures that I mentioned earlier. If we took out COVID-related absence, we would have seen a performance of 2.19 FTE days for Q1. Thank you, Chair.
It's more of a comment, Chair. While I welcome the fact that we are improving, and I think the figures are definitely better than they were, I still want to keep the pressure on, because if you take out the COVID, we've still missed the last target, and therefore we are still losing 2 days per person throughout the... So that's just a point to say that we need to make sure that we keep the pressure on the management to reduce this amount of lost time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't hear all your verbal contribution, but having looked at the I haven't said anything yet. But I think it was just following from Councillor Carr's comments about the fact that we're still, you made lots of progress, but there's still a lot more to be done. And your comments about mental health champions is the right thing, to get more and more people to sort of come forward early, and to encourage through the champions to sort of help people to have the confidence to get help, so that it doesn't get into a longer term sickness absence. But one of the things, I'm not sure if you've covered it in your report, one of the things is that you can do all the things you want to, but because the demands on the workforce, because the numbers are not as high as I'm sure you'd want, and we all want, that has a damaging impact on resilience and capacity for individuals to continue doing their job the way they want to. Can you make any comment on that in terms of how that is impacting? In addition, I mean, you seem to be doing all the strategic things that you can do, which are in your control, but many are not.
Thanks, Chair. So thanks, Councillor Carr and Councillor Dinser, for your comments there. I hope the committee can see, if I may pick up Councillor Carr's comment and then Councillor Dinser's, I hope the committee can see that managers do very much take seriously and continue to do, and we have seen a decrease in our absence, as I say, compared to Q4. Managers do take very seriously their accountabilities in terms of managing attendance and supporting the well-being and the management of their teams, and we will continue, Councillor Carr, to work with managers to do that, and the action plans that they have in place, the heads of service, supports that work. Also, perhaps that might help pick up, I hope, Councillor Dinser, your helpful comment around, we have an overall approach as a council, but obviously we are a very diverse council in terms of the range of services that we have. So those specific service action plans are very much around looking at what are the particular priorities and challenges in those services at that time, and how can heads of service and their management teams and wider team colleagues support each other in their health and well-being whilst at work. And that includes people's levels of resilience and people's support and knowledge about how to get support both within the council and externally. So I hope the committee will feel reassured that managers very much take their accountability seriously, both in managing attendance and supporting colleagues with their resilience and well-being and the management of the work within their teams. And they will continue to do so, Chair. Councillor Dinser. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Holmes?
I was just wanting to pick up on the first aid. I mean, you might not be able to answer this question, but I just wondered how well they were attended. Like, how have staff got used to them being there, and are they happy to go to them, or, how well is it attended?
Thanks, Councillor Holmes. I don't have figures to hand. However, what I can confirm, I'm a mental health champion myself, trained, and other colleagues in the room maybe. I can confirm that particularly, I think, with the move from, we did see a lot of contact with the mental health first aiders, which they were originally, but I think the move to mental health champions has helped. And I'm saying this anecdotally, Councillor Holmes, because I don't have the details in front of me, but being a mental health champion myself, being on some of the sessions with fellow mental health champions about our change of emphasis in our role, I think the feedback certainly that I've heard is that it's welcomed by colleagues, because as we've said in the report, sometimes the mental health first aid rightly was seen as that sort of crisis contact. Perhaps picking up Councillor Dinser's comment, it's also about us changing the focus to say, try not to wait until it becomes a crisis. We're available as champions to come to team meetings, to talk about well-being in general, to have one-to-one conversations as well as in teams. So it's something that we are monitoring, and the colleague who actually sort of facilitates and coordinates the mental health champions does keep information around how much contact we're getting as mental health first aiders. But I think, as I say, the slight change in focus of the role will enable colleagues to, wider council colleagues, to have a broader access. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Dinser?
Yeah, just on the three top reasons for absence. The other one you've got in there is the COVID-19 related absences, which is 9.25%.
Sorry.
You know, there's you give three top reasons for absence, and the third one is COVID-19 related absences, which is at 9.25%.
Yeah.
We've seen some of that in terms of our recycling and bin collection issues in terms of staffing. I assume that's COVID related in terms of missed bins, the brown bin collection being put back, and you know that is because of, I'm assuming that's to do with COVID related. So what are the plans and strategies of actually tackling that? Because early on it was a system of self-isolation, and I'm not sure if that's changed now, because that led to quite a devastating impact on service, quality of service delivery, particularly by our recycling bin men and women.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Dinser. So the Council very much, whether it's refuse collection or any other service, is continuing to follow the national guidance from Public Health England, the NHS and the government in terms of COVID-safe measures in the workplace. The rules on self-isolation, as you may recall, changed on the 16th of August in terms of nationally the rules changed. So the Council follows the national guidance that's in place, and we continue to be advised by our Director of Public Health and our health and safety teams. So risk assessments, appropriate national guidance is being followed, and services have continued throughout. Frontline services and other services have continued to follow the national guidance, ensure that we have appropriate risk assessments in place, and that we take the contingency measures that we can if we do experience temporary spikes in absence for whatever reason. But in terms of our approach, we are very much following the national guidance and the appropriate health and safety legislation to try and ensure and maintain an appropriate working environment.
Just to come back on that, one of the national guidance was dependent on the system of identifying people, and we know that it can be, there could be a wall in the way and there's somebody on the other side, but you have to self-isolate. I mean, have those sort of things been ironed out or been challenged? Because that has led to a negative consequence of using public health safety to protect our staff and others. Those sort of things being ironed out, is that going to make a difference? Have we seen improvements? Are we going to see improvements or not, from your experience?
So, Chair, I can't comment on the national guidance in terms of whether queries have been ironed out. I understand the point you're making, Councillor Dinser, about the wall and so on. However, I think the changes that came in on the 16th of August, excuse me, in terms of self-isolation and NHS test and trace, contacting people, and if people have been double jabbed, double vaccinated, I should say, more than 2 weeks prior to being contacted, they receive advice from the NHS on whether they need to self-isolate or not. So I think perhaps I hope that may answer some of your question, Councillor Dinder, because there has been an adjustment in the national approach on self-isolation. And as I say, we follow those rules. There are different provisions in place since the 16th of August for colleagues who work in health and social care. So they have a different regime, as you would expect, particularly colleagues working in our care homes. So it's early days yet, since the 16th of August, to see whether that change in the national position on self-isolation will see will follow through to a major change for us. But certainly in our next report, Councillors, into to Personnel Committee for the next quarter, we should be able to see whether there's been a change there. Thank you.
That would be helpful to get that information, particularly in the next report update. Yeah.
Meeting. Any more questions for Liz? No? Thank you very much. Thanks, Liz, for presenting the report and answering the questions. Thank you very much. Item number 6. Employment and Skills Board update. We have Pauline here, and she will update it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible for you to move the slides forward when I say, or is that okay? Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Pauline Anderson, and I'm the Director of Learning, Inclusion and Skills for the City Council. And thank you for inviting me to give an overview of how we develop skills across the city, skills for employment, essentially. And we've already established that this is a broad overview of the work that we do as a council across the whole city, which is divided across 2 directorates. One is mine, which is Learning, Inclusion and Skills, and the other is in City Development and Growth, which is with the Director, David Fletcher, who apologises and can't be here today. Thank you. Could you move to the next slide, please? So the key document that we are working to is the Government Skills for Jobs White Paper, which is concerned that employers and providers don't always work together, presume sufficiently, to agree what skills are needed to meet local labour market demands. And Derby is responding to the challenges set there within the white paper, and it is the key national driver for the work that we're doing. And there's a link there within that if you wish to look further at that white paper. Next slide, please. Within the Learning, Inclusion and Skills area, I have the Derby Adult Learning department, if you like, and that has traditionally really focused on community learning, family learning, etc., and a whole range of wonderful, inventive and superb courses which people across Derby are able to access. But really, in the last 2 years, and particularly intensifying during the pandemic, we have strengthened the work that we're doing in delivering a support for skills provision and really supporting the citizens of Derby through the Derby Employment Hub, our employability workshops, through working with Liz's team and internal teams to support the pipeline of skills development across internally as well as externally, and using and becoming an exemplar really in preparing people with English as an additional language through significant funding, over £350,000 we brought in from the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government, and we're about to receive another substantial amount, and we see that's really important for preparing people with level 1 English to improve their English to access employment and really live a better life. So it's a really important piece of work. We also give information and guidance on careers and skills, and we do have a bid in as well to expand that work, and we're waiting to hear about that soon. So there's a huge amount of work that you might not have expected was happening within the Derby Adult Learning Service. And a lot of that is because we appointed a real expert in skills and employment in our relatively new head of service who works for me, and Anna Mims. You might have heard her name. And if you've ever met Anna, you'll never forget meeting her. She's a real source of energy and an expert really in employability and skills. We're very lucky to have her. So that's the Adult Learning Service and how we're making a contribution. Next slide, please. So we also work very closely with employers and work to link communities to jobs. Again, we're developing the sector-based work academies and looking at recruitment pipelines, lines into guaranteed interviews, particularly for vulnerable groups and key areas of work, health and social care, as well as in education, teaching assistants, etc. We're working with our own council parks department. I said health and social care. We're working with it should be Derby On shopping centre, the emerging employment opportunities at the Smart Park, and Anna has good connections with the Smart Park team from a previous role where she actually worked with some of those people elsewhere. And the Enterprise for Education, E4E, it sits within my department within education, and that is a team that connects employers and schools, so that we're strengthening the understanding in schools that, yes, we are preparing for a broad and balanced education, but actually we want young people to get into training and employment, and that's really important. We're also strengthening the work with schools through the Opportunity Area, which is the Department for Education initiative, which is now coming to the end of its 4th year. Has completed 4 years, it's just going into its fifth year. So we are very lucky to be receiving a further 1.5 million to developing education and skills from the Department for Education. Moving on, thank you. As I say, 5 years of DFE investment, which has probably totaled around 7 million, has focused on the early years primary education, secondary schools, inclusion and careers and skills. And for the last year, I've been chairing the Derby Careers and Skills subgroup, which links to D2N2 employment hubs across the D2N2 region and the LEPs. So we are in danger of joining up because I think previously things have been felt a bit scattered in the employment and skills arena, and I can honestly, I feel it's really pulling and knitting together in a more strategic way now. So I hope you would be reassured by that. The Derby Opportunity Area, I sit on that board, which is chaired by Professor Kath Mitchell of the University of Derby. Andy Smith also is part of the board, and a whole number of schools, colleges and employers, key employers, Rolls-Royce, Toyota, and of course the Department for Education, who are funding this, clearly have a role on the board and facilitation. The programme manager for the Opportunity Area is Alex Manning-Jones and has just been appointed and reports to me, so actually sits within the council. She has vast experience of working with young people, disadvantaged young people across all the wards of Derby. She knows Derby inside out, and previously worked with Derby Theatre, so she's a really good addition to the Opportunity Area. And I suppose what I'm trying to say there is that we're really drilling down and making the work very close to our communities. It's not sort of an ivory tower where we're all sort of sitting at this wonderful table. A lot of work has been done on the ground. If you look at the kind of the work that we did on This is Derby, which has a website of wonderful leisure and culture activity that we provided across the city a couple of years ago, and that was just phenomenal. And we're also providing careers information and guidance within schools, and again, you know, bringing employers closer to schools and developing the skills and employment pathway for young people. Next slide, please. There is quite a complicated diagram there which explains the recruitment pipeline, which I mentioned earlier, which is the sector-based work academy. I'm not going to go through every bit of it, but it really is explaining how, you know, we've streamlined a process for the to bring people through the Derby City Council front door, then to take them to support them through the adult learning service into that employment pipeline and guaranteed interviews, etc. And I think that, you know, that's quite innovative, and the partnership between Liz's team and HR and the adult learning service has just been exemplary. I probably think that's a national leader in that work. I'd go so far as to say. So thank you, Liz, and your teams for that. Next slide, please. The Education Skills Funding Agency funds skills accredited courses, and we have been extremely busy in developing these. Again, huge energy coming from the Derby Adult Learning staff led by Anna Mims, but there are some really fabulous people working there. I think we've had hidden talent in those teams over the years, and they're all coming to the surface now. And we redesigned the whole curriculum to meet the Skills White Paper priorities, and we support 3,500 learners a year. We've been involved in a digital skills pilot, so 400 staff achieved 2,000 modules with wider rollout across Derby. And as I said, we've supported approximately 500 English speakers of other languages through the substantial funding that we brought in from the NHCLG. We deliver that, interestingly, through partners. One of those partners is ArtCore, which has offices across there, Rashita and Zahir, who have brought art into Derby, and community art particularly, and we commissioned them to deliver English ESOL classes through art and design, and it's been hugely successful, so we'll be recommissioning them and a number of other partners. So we don't necessarily deliver every lesson ourselves. We find the best way of reaching different communities, and we've had superb feedback from the learners. A range of courses and apprenticeships, and the apprenticeships are available, and I think this is of interest to the Personnel Committee for DCC staff. And I suppose the division is that HR are looking at the internal apprenticeships, whereas David's team, which I'll come to in a minute, is looking at developing and supporting apprenticeships particularly with our small and medium enterprise employers. That split has just happened very recently, and so that's under development. So, you know, we moved all our training online during the pandemic, and we actually achieved 90% of our skills funding target, which is again one of the best in the country. So we didn't really lose learners, and in fact we gained additional 700 learners online during the pandemic. Some people would never have attended a physical course. We're very much joined up with government funded providers, and we're part of the DWP Restart programme, working in partnership with Reed, again you know, all about getting more people into employment. Next slide, thank you. This slide is from David Fletcher's department. I'm probably less fluent in this, but it just explains really in a diagrammatic form what was previously called the economic growth, but employment and skills sits here. Sabina Talib is an excellent colleague who works with David and is leading on this, and is really holds a lot of the data on employment and skills gaps, and what employers are saying about the skills support that's needed to get people into jobs. So as you can see, there is employment support, welfare, and helping people to overcome barriers to employment, skills support, helping people to become upskilled and, have they got the skills to get into those particular jobs, and the recruitment support, which is business focused, how do we support those recruitment pipelines. And so we just need to be aware of what the demand is and what business needs there are in the city. And if you, for example, look at the new Smart Park coming on board, food technology, etc., that's opened up a whole new range of skills that we would be wanting to deliver and upskill people to be able to get those jobs, and so that Derby residents were fully employed there. Next slide, please. So our role is impartial brokerage. We work on behalf of all the residents of the city, and we help to navigate the business landscape for businesses. David's teams really hold the key relationship with employers, whereas in my area we tend to focus on the individuals and the learners and the people who are looking for the jobs. David's team will collaborate with training providers, and we're just one of those in the adult learning service, and they advertise all opportunities and help the recruitment campaigns. And as I said earlier, they help us to understand and solve the skills gap, and they work on that with the employers. Next slide, please. So key considerations, we are looking at how we brand. So it's really important that we are a core part of the economic growth support offer and that it's not separate. I can't see that, that's really hard. Resources, recruitment of businesses, engagement, yeah. So we have, in David's team, they have appointed 3 new people to work in this area, bearing in mind that the pandemic has obviously created a greater need for support into employment and higher unemployment. And the key next steps for David's teams are the 3 bullet points there: website, development, marketing, partnerships and engagement, and the apprenticeship levy launch event, which is, as I say, not the apprenticeships within the council, but the ones that we're looking to support and use the apprenticeship levy, the 20% that's available for the small and medium enterprises, and to really maximise the use of that levy out there in the business community. Thank you.
Any question? Councillor Skelton?
Thank you. Just sort of a query on terminology, really. A couple of slides back, it's got on the last bullet point, understand and solve the skills gap. Do we mean both skills gap and skills shortage? I've always been taught that skills gap is when somebody is actually in a job, but they need some training in order to be able to fulfill that role completely and to a high standard. Whereas skills shortage is where employers cannot find people to recruit with the requisite skills for those particular jobs.
Yeah, I think it's a useful question. Thank you, Chair, if you don't mind. I believe it to mean the latter. It's a skills shortage. I'll have a chat with Sabina about that, because if that's misleading, then I understand. But my assumption, working assumption, that it is about the gap, the shortage. Yeah, thank you.
A lot of people do use the terms interchangeably, but actually they are different things. So thanks.
Carl?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to thank the Director for that. That's given us a much clearer picture of what they are doing. I think, as Pauline intimated at our pre-meeting, a lot of it falls outside, probably most of it, the remit of this committee, but it was really, really interesting. But there's 3 areas where I think I'd be interested to know more, and maybe we could have somebody from those 3 areas at one of our future meetings, which is the E4E, the social workers and the parks department, where we do have a responsibility for the personnel in those areas. So I'd be interested to know more about those three aspects of the work, which I commend. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor
Yes,
Nissan.
we'd be very happy to come back with more information on those areas.
Yeah. Yeah, just to support Councillor Carr's point about our own, because this report is wider than just our committee, scrutiny board, sorry. But I think where we have got interest is the social workers in particular. That historically, there's always been a vacancies, high vacancies, because of the type of job that is. It's a difficult job, and recruiting people is not easy. So looking at that, if we're looking at skills development within our own resources, it'd be really helpful to look at those areas, including parks and other places, where how do we develop and encourage and get up to speed, because social care, social services, protecting the vulnerable is always hard at the best of times, but it's harder when there's not enough staff of the right quality and training available or applying. So that's an area which I'll just reinforce and support Councillor Carr's comments. My questions initially are a bit wider. There's a lot of name changes here, Pauline, in terms of economic growth is no longer economic growth, it's called skills development. There's another change you mentioned, you know, what has been the success? I appreciate you've been here not long. I don't know how long you've been in post, but can you give us an observation? What are those changes cosmetic or reflecting on how successful or not successful were the previous efforts to get to where we are? You know, it seems to be a refresh, a reframing, restart. Looking at the presentation you've given, can you give me anyway some comments on what you think has been happening or not happening, and what has been learned, and what more can be done to be more impactful?
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to do that. So for the last 4 years, I began as a head of service 5 years ago. I came to Derby. I originally came to work for 15 days, but I loved it so much that I stayed. And then as an opportunity arose, I became interim director about 4 years ago, and then became permanent director last June. In the middle of the pandemic, in June 2020, I was offered and accepted the permanent role. But I had been developing the adult learning service to move it to more of a outward-facing and skills-led part of the organisation. But essentially, the names have stayed the same in my department. So learning, inclusion and skills, taking in adult learning. The bigger change has come in the city development and growth and the economic growth. When previous colleagues left and David Fletcher arrived in January this year, then I think it was decided to make a significant change with a new director in that area, to move to city development and growth and again re-emphasise employment and skills. I think they're still trying that out, so I would understand any confusion, it being so recent and not necessarily very widely understood and publicised. So I think you've made a good point.
Thank you for that explanation, and maybe David Fletcher's was probably less in our remit for this scrutiny board, but we'll pursue that at a different place, at a different time. Chair, the thing for me is the bits about our workforce. There's one slide earlier that was on there, which I don't know if you can bring it up, which is about saying we've got 400 staff who come through the skills development that you describe, and we've got 500 people who've got ESOL, English as a second language. Are those figures good, bad, or
they're very good.
could be better?
They're very good, which is why
in view of the size of our workforce.
With this, those are the ESOL are community members, which may also be employees, but it's a community-focused programme, and that is where we brought in the 350,000 for from the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government, and because we're so successful, and that's numbers as well as the quality of the provision, they're seeking to reinvest in Derby. So I would say kind of award-winning work really in that area.
Yeah. Chair, do we know how many, do we have a sense of how many people require, who have English as a second language there and therefore could benefit? Do we know if the officer knows whether the 500 is how many? Do we have a sense of how many in total there may be in the city?
Pauline, can you answer that?
Sorry, yeah, we would be looking to work with our communities team, with Pop Gill, to look at, the number of new arrivals, because of course we have people who have English as an additional language. They may speak 2, 3 or 4 languages, but they're not at the very beginning of speaking English. They've been in the country for some years and actually they have very good English. This is to look at, looking at how, so working, we need to look at the numbers of new arrivals, which includes refugees, asylum seekers, etc., and to drill down and work on that data with Pop Gill, I think, really, to give you an honest answer.
Chair, that probably requires the information to be gathered and brought back here for a future meeting. I think it'd be helpful to understand what the scale of the problem is. The officer saying that 500 is good number. I've got no reason to doubt that, but it would be helpful to compare it with what we think is our best estimates.
Yeah, we're not the only provider. I think understanding the landscape is really important.
Sorry, you mentioned Pop Gill as the community cohesion officer, and he is one source, but he can't be the only source that we use to determine English as a second language need or numbers for the city.
Sorry, apologies, Chair. Though I didn't hear that you hadn't finished. Just to note that we're not the only provider of ESOL in the city. There are other private providers and other colleges. Just might be useful to be aware of that.
Well, I'm sure Pauline can get all the information for next meeting. Yeah, thank you. Any more questions? No? In that case, thank you very much. Thanks, Pauline. You presented and answered very good questions. And I hope you can bring it more information for next meeting. Thank you very much. I'll close the meeting now.